Hey, y'all. Progress Texas podcasting director Chris Mosier here. You know, difficult conversations should take place in all regions of a diverse state like Texas, especially after 30 plus years of one-party rule. Beyond placing blame on rural regions or certain sects of historically Democratic voters, we should first take a deep look inwards and be ready to listen to those different from ourselves. Last month, over No Kings Weekend, 100 Democratic County Party chairs, rural organizers, and freshly announced candidates took part in the 134 PAC's Rural Texas Coalition Building Summit in Bastrop, Texas. They invited both yours truly and Progress Texas Advocacy Manager and former small-town City Councilor Reagan Stone to take part, and that was an honor for both of us and lots of fun. This episode is a largely unedited recording of the closing panel of the event entitled Talking with Your Rural Neighbors, on which Reagan joined San Angelo attorney and co-founder of the 134 PAC Jon Mark Hogg and seasoned rural political consultant and proud Missouri farmer Will Westmoreland to start the hunt for answering questions on turning Texas blue. What results here is an entertaining and thought-provoking off-prompt attempt at defining why our conservative neighbors don't always vote for what may serve their best interests, or at least why it sure might not seem that way to progressive folks, and explore strategies on how those same progressive folks might get productive conversations going with their more conservative counterparts. The first voice you'll hear here is moderator and University of Houston at Victoria political science professor Woodrow Wilson Wagner. Enjoy.
Thank you. That was a very kind introduction. Wow, I have to live up to that now. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me here in Bastrop. It's so wonderful to be with like-minded individuals. Those last two panels I really found really helpful. Just a little bit about me. How do I get to a place like this? Well, as Steve said, I'm a former chair of the Victoria County Democratic Party. A lot of the causes, a lot of the things that you all are focusing on are certainly near and dear to my heart. But what I have found as not being the formal chair of the Democratic Party is that it's allowed me into a number of other conversations that I wasn't able to have with people on the other side of the aisle. For instance, empowering our first generation underserved students, which is a huge priority for me. I don't know how many of you are aware of organizations or designations like HSI, Hispanic Serving Institutions. That's a big deal in Washington, D.C. right now. 2 days ago, the same gentleman who initiated the lawsuits against Harvard University, anybody following that, has now issued lawsuits against the Department of Education to abolish all HSI designations. All Hispanic serving institutions. Now, that's a big deal for me personally. The University of Houston, Victoria, soon to become Texas A&M University, Victoria. Whoop, any Aggies in the house? No, okay. Hopefully you don't hold against me. But that is a huge deal to us. Hundreds of millions of dollars of federal funding in Title III, Title V, Pell Grants. Our students are desperately depending on. So I just got off a plane last night in Washington, D.C., or I spent the week trying desperately to have conversations, mainly with people across the aisle, about why HSI is a thing and why they should care about that. And I hope I've learned some things from these kind of conversations. I look forward to our panelists sharing their perspectives, because the purity tests, the absolute statements, those aren't getting us anywhere. Politics is not a zero-sum game. Not every Republican is this. Not every Democrat is this. Do things the Republicans do drive me crazy? Yes, on a regular daily basis. Do things the Democrats do sometimes drive me crazy? Yes, they do, which is why I'm no longer the chair of the Democratic Party in that county. So we have to work across the aisle. I think the fact that you came today speaks to the fact that you have a desire for that. It doesn't mean you're going to capitulate. It doesn't mean you're going to abandon your fundamental principles. It just means you're going to have a conversation that hopefully ends in the HSI designation not going away. I had a conversation with a gentleman named Congressman Michael Cloud. Anybody know Michael Cloud, that name, okay? Super MAGA, super Doge. Probably not somebody that most of you would want to sit down with. But I talked to him for an hour and a half about how the Department of Education is holding hostage $750,000 from our Title III grant. And they're basically saying, no, we're not giving that to you. He makes a phone call. 2 days later, we get that money. So again, there is hope. There is some light at the end of these tunnels. I know it seems dark. I know it seems hopeless. I know it seems frustrating. But there is opportunity. And I hope to try to give you some thoughts and strategies in this next panel to do that. If our panelists can come on up, I think some of them that you have seen before already. And I'm just going to hand them, I think I've talked enough. I'm going to hand them the mic and let them briefly introduce themselves, what their perspective is on talking to our rural neighbors, and not just rural neighbors, but those neighbors who don't have the same perspectives as we do, especially those people who are very conservative, very Republican, very MAGA. How can we possibly sit down and have a conversation with such humans? I hope that each of you will give us some of those clues, as I'll try to give you as well. So why don't you start off, tell them who you are. I think some people already know, but just who you are and why this is such an important thing for you.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for allowing me to be here. Thank you, Steve and 134. My name's Reagan Stone. I am foremost the Progress Texas Advocacy Manager. That is a world that includes getting here early and running AV and getting recordings so that we can get this out to all the Texans across the state, to also advocacy for good causes at the state capitol, and of course our podcast as well, running that. Y'all can all catch the Daily Dispatch anywhere you get podcasts. But also, I'm a former city council member in the small town of Alpine, Texas, Brewster County, 9,800 folks, home of Big Bend National Park. And I'll pass it along.
I'm Jon Mark Hogg. I'm one of the founders of the 134 PAC and have served on the City Council in San Angelo, ran for Congress in 2020, back when I thought some Republicans might actually not vote for Trump, and I was disabused of that notion very quickly. And I'm glad to be here.
My name is Will Westmoreland. I'm a farmer in Missouri. I've been involved in politics for probably a little over 30 years, served as a county party chair in North Carolina and in Missouri. And I think that I will say this, probably 9 out of 10 friends that I have are MAGA. They're in rural America. I grew up with them. I've known them my entire life. And I jokingly say if I made my friends based on my politics where I live, I wouldn't have any friends. But I think it also gives me a unique opportunity on a daily basis to talk to people who drastically disagree with me on my politics. And I got to tell you, they're coming around. Maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that. But they've been listening for a long time, but now I'm starting to see changed minds. And a lot of that has to do with those conversations we've had for the last 4, 6, 10 years. And I'm looking forward with this group of digging into that a little bit more.
Thank you all so much, gentlemen. What a great place to kind of start our conversation, just to pick up on that. Here's a thought. Is there a way to distinguish between the Trump voter as a human and the fact that they did pull that lever consciously, some of them 3 times in a row? And what I am starting to see in my conversations, and I'm anxious to see what you all are thinking too, is that there are some of my friends who will say, there's no difference. They're terrible. They're terrible humans for pulling that lever. If they were good humans, they wouldn't pull that lever. At the end. Okay. But as you just suggested in my life too, I think Carlos said y'all are at 80%. We're about 95% red. It's super red. Right? I get up in the morning and I see red, right? It's everywhere. So I would have to make some decisions, not just friends, but we're talking about my family. 4 or 5 generations of our family have been in the city. We literally built this city. My family was in construction. And they're all pretty much red. Family gatherings would get awkward. So, again, I don't want to tell you how to run your own lives. You can decide what you want to do in your associations. But if we start saying all the Trump voters are dumb, they're stupid. And I want nothing to do with those stupids. That's fine, you can do that, but how does that get closer to any of our goals? Does that get us a meeting with Congressman Michael Cloud? There are people in the Democratic Party who refuse in our county to meet with them. They call him traitor. They call him Nazi. But they also say they're very concerned about first-generation students not getting their Pell Grants. You think he's going to be taking their meeting? So, on that question, distinguishing between the Trump voter and Trump, can I not approve of Trump and not vote for Trump but still have a relationship with the Trump voter? What say you?
It's a really good question. I run into this in many different places, obviously in the day job with Progress Texas, but more so when I'm in Alpine, and with this legislative session, I've been going back between Austin and Alpine. But when I'm in Alpine, and specifically when I was on city council, folks had my cell phone number. And that might have been a mistake. I think we heard that earlier as well. But I would get calls about, of course, everything from the potholes to the water bill is outrageous to this and that. And I think a lot of the things is they'd reach out to me because a mayor or someone else would be like, contact your city council member. And I might be circling around this question, but a lot of folks would immediately say, hey, I don't agree with you on X, Y, or Z. In my community, I was fighting a gun show that didn't have background checks at our state university. And of course, I had a room full like this, except they all came and they thought that I was taking away their guns. I stood up and I was like, little old me? Like, you think I'm coming to your house to take away your guns? I kind of made a point there. But on these phone calls, they'd say, I don't agree with you on this stuff, but I like at the last council meeting, you said we need to have better communication. We need to have transparency about what the water billing issues are. And, I want to know how we're going to get better infrastructure. And so I think something that I'm trying to pin here is that there's a lot of places to meet people where they are. And despite the fact that I don't hold always the same vote with them, or the fact of the matter that I say to them that we might not have the same values. That's really where it comes down to. And I'll pause there, and we'll probably circle back more on that.
Well said. Thank you.
Well, I think the answer to that question is you have to. You have to find a way to separate the vote that someone made, maybe someone very close to you, many people in my own family. There's a joke in my family, my wife and I canceled each other out for years. We're not canceling each other out anymore. She's in public education. But that was kind of the joke. When I ran for Congress, we did the van numbers to see how likely it was that she was to vote for me, and I think it was 0.075% based upon her past voting record. So there are people in your life and in your family who are dear to you, who you've grown up with, who you've lived with your whole life, and they're doing things that you think are crazy. They think the things that you believe and who you vote for is just as crazy. How you find the ability to do that, it's very difficult, and it can only be made on a person-to-person basis. It's kind of like the old saying, do you want to be right or do you want to have the relationship? And if you want to have that relationship, which I think the relationship is much more important, and I think finding a way to get past that is very important for you. Carla asked me to be on this panel because she said, I know you're a conservative Democrat, and I would say, well, if you ask many people in my family, And most of my friends in San Angelo, the idea that you would use the word conservative with me is really funny. But, and that's only because I said, if you think I'm a liberal, you haven't met one yet. But the whole idea is that these are the people we have to understand, and this is kind of the main point that I wanted to make, is we have to understand where we are and where we live. We don't have the luxury in a rural red county of saying, I want to have the most progressive policies, the most progressive electorate. I can't change the county. I have the county that I have the county that I live in. I have to be able to know these people. They have to be able to know me. And that's the only way, when you talk about having the conversations about people actually starting to change, is for them to realize that there's nothing abnormal about you being a Democrat. You don't have horns growing out of your head. And that you are the same person that they've always known. And I've had other Republican elected officials, we kind of joke about this, about being a Democrat. Are you sure you want to associate with a Democrat? And a Republican judge friend of mine in San Angelo said this, you say that, but he said, when I see you, all I see is Jon Mark, my friend. And I think that's the most important thing that you can take away to try to maintain those relationships to move forward. So the answer is, I think you have to.
Well said, thank you. What a great compliment to be able to say that to you.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I've got a good friend. One time somebody asked me, because I'll be honest with you guys, I catch more heat from people on our side of the aisle when I say we have to meet people where they are and try to bring them back to, our way of thinking. And I think I did make a mistake in the beginning of not clarifying that, and I try to do that now, because a good friend of mine, John Bowman, is the head of the NAACP in St. Louis County, Missouri. And he said, Will, he goes, I think you catch a lot of heat when I first started doing this. He goes, you need to clarify. He said, I know you, but most people don't. You're establishing your credibility right now. And he said, you don't meet a Nazi halfway. You don't meet a KKK member halfway. You don't meet somebody that hates women halfway. Well, I just kind of assumed that was in the presentation for me when I said meet people halfway. Those aren't the people I'm talking about meeting halfway. Now, there are dedicated Democrats and Christians among us who have made it their calling in life to meet those people halfway and to try to bring them back to the right way of thinking. But when I talk about meeting people halfway, I'm talking about the folks that you guys just brought up. And I'll give you just a real quick example to illustrate the point. In the little town I grew up in and graduated from, Bolivar High School, where those red hat ladies were that bought me those 2 suits, that county is 82% Republican. They voted 82% for Donald Trump. We had 3 people that ran for the school board on a book banning platform. They wanted to ban books. They wanted to instill Christian indoctrination in our public school. And in this 82% Donald Trump supporting county, they all got shellacked in the election. The Republicans in that county voted them down across the board. They voted for a new funding issue for the school. They have supported that school for 100 years before I graduated from there. They'll be supporting that school for 100 years after. There's a reason for that. And in my mind, the reason that I found in talking with people is because even in that red county, that red Trump supporting county, the vast majority of the population believes in a good, solid education for their young people. And I think there are a lot of places around America where Democrats look at that and they just don't think that's possible. They think that, there isn't any way to meet somebody halfway on education or on other issues that are important to us. So I think for 2 reasons it's important to be willing to have these conversations. One, we're in a closed room here, so we can say it out loud. We know the way we think is the right way. And to get people to come over to our way of thinking, we've got to bring them from the point where they are to the point where we are. And the easiest way to do that, or the best way to do that, is to meet them and bring them along. The other thing I would say, though, is communities are successful because the people in those communities work together for the betterment of that community. And I think that's the most important thing the commissioner said. That's what I took away from what he said. And we've lost that. We've lost that, where every single thing we try to do in our communities, we have a political litmus test that we put it through that costs us a lot. It's cost us bad ag policy. It's cost us school consolidation and closures. It's cost us rural hospitals going under and all these other things that I mentioned. So I just think from a necessity perspective, convincing people to come to where we are and saving our schools and our hospitals, et cetera, we've got to be willing to meet them halfway and talk with them. My humble opinion.
No, well said. I think all of you kind of touched on this, the idea about being right versus having the relationship. My name is Woodrow Wilson Wagner. My great-granddad worked for the president's 1912 campaign. He named his first son Woodrow Wilson Wagner. Since I was a child, I've learned about Woodrow Wilson. It's not all great. Some of it's good. Some of it's outstanding. He did save democracy as we know it there. But there was that great speech, the war message, when he says, the right is more precious than peace. And I have struggled with that personally my whole life. Because I think, like everybody in here, I want to do what's right. I don't want to be on the wrong side of history or morality. But at the same time, I'm a pragmatist, especially in politics. And I want to desperately make sure this HSI funding, I'm sorry, we're going to keep going back to this, but I want to make sure that's not eliminated. I want to make sure other issues that I care about are still in place. And so I want to be right, like all of us do. But I know that sometimes I can't always lead with that and shame people into thinking that they're stupid. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yep.
I'm right. And not only am I right, but you're stupid. And sometimes they are stupid, right? And many things they're saying are not true. But where does it get us? Does it get us to the public policy decision-making table? This is the thing I talk about constantly. How am I going to get, I don't care what I am, Republican, Democrat, Independent, whatever, Federalist, I don't care what I am. How can I get to that public policy making table so I can actually talk to the people like Congressman Michael Cloud, who has the levers of power, who can make a phone call and get $538,000 more dollars for our Title III grant? How am I going to get there? So I'm sure you all go through the same thing about you want to do the right thing. You have a sense of a moral compass. But at the same time, there's negotiation, there's compromise, and I'm real interested to hear how y'all navigated that, where you're still able at the end of the day, you go to sleep at night and you're like, I am doing the right thing. I didn't sell my soul. I'm still standing up for the virtues and the values I care about. But I had to eat a little crow, and I had to do some things that were uncomfortable, not immoral, uncomfortable. So talk about navigating that if you don't mind.
Sure. And I think, a good place to say I've been hanging out with this migration caucus in Alpine a lot, Borderlands Ministries, and the priest that leads that says if your group is all in agreement, then it's too small. I love that. And I hate it too because, it's a lot easier to go the other way. Going back to council in some way, I was the youngest guy. I moved to the area. I grew up in a small town as well in San Antonio and then in Austin and then went to Alpine. But I was a new guy to Alpine too. So, it was like this guy I had super long hair. I did not look like I was supposed to be sitting on the dais with everyone else. But with that, it took some lessons. And I think there's separation, different deposits I'm putting it in. And you have to make sure you're adding up at the end of the day. So for instance, a battle that I'm willing to go to for a reason, like the gun safety issue. First attacking the leaders in our city that were willing to advertise. By the way, it was put on by the Lions Club. Attacking the Lions Club, dude. Yeah, I know. What was I thinking? And then attacking the university. And then, going forward and getting a phone call recorded with Texas State University's telling me that the gun show's illegal and then advertising that. Point being of what I'm saying is, something I learned is I didn't have all the people behind me, no matter what. Only 40 or 50% of the folks in that community probably would agree. But I didn't have the turnout at the council meetings there anyway. And so my goal was to rile people up, was to try to get folks to turn out in November, was to say, hey, there's somebody willing to put their name and feel unsafe at night. And trust me, I had some sleepless nights, some threats, some different things like that. But then at the same time, I was saying this to someone else earlier, is I got in agreement with a council of 5. I was the single person that had a left view, or, I started joking with people, I'm a card-carrying socialist in Alpine, Texas. But point being is I had a kind of an understanding with those other 4 members, is like, hey, I'm gonna give you a wink and I'm gonna speak for a couple minutes and we're gonna vote on this and we already know it's gonna pass, but I'm gonna say my 2 cents. Or let me wink my other eye, and this is really good policy and we should look at this and let's talk about it. And raising the minimum wage in Alpine for city employees to $15 an hour and getting a compensation package that looked like a normal town should have had 2 decades ago, or moving our elections from May to November. These were wins that I did in 1 year. And at the same time, having a lot of people not like me. And then also, I'll say today, we went from having 10 or 20 folks at our rallies in the spring to 300 folks showing up at the Brewster County Courthouse today. A lot of that is Ramon Rodriguez sitting right here in front of me as well. So, yes. But we are noticing that there is people coming together, and there's going to be organizations in Alpine, in Marfa, and Fort Davis that are similar to those during the civil rights movement or the women's rights movement, or like the gay rights movement, like ACT UP. Those are things that I'm studying now to see how we can organize and continue some of the good work that's happening.
So you sleep great at night?
Sometimes.
Okay.
Well, I'm going to take the devil's advocate position here. I am a lawyer after all, so let's just go ahead and put that out there. I think sometimes we get so focused on being right, we ignore the importance of getting elected. And I think I understand what you're saying by be right or be at peace or whatever. But the one thing I criticize my party on, and I've been a lifelong Democrat, is we're so focused right now on the rightness of our position. We are not in a position to get elected in what is a very conservative state. We refuse to acknowledge that Texas overall, and I'm not talking about pockets, I'm not talking about Austin, I'm not talking about different places, but overall, Texas is and always has been a very conservative state. And I'm not, if you've got a special district that fits your group, that's fine. But when we start talking about it, at a 30,000-foot view, if we spend all our time thinking we have to be morally right on every issue and that there's never any compromise on any of those issues, we're going to continue to lose. And so the ethics of it, how do you deal with it on a personal basis, and how I come to that compromise, the first idea is to realize we all think we're right. And everybody on the other side thinks they're right. Donald Trump thinks he's right. What we have to understand is the ability to see things from a different point of view, from the Republican or your more conservative neighbor's point of view. Not that you agree with them, but that you can start to understand what is motivating, what is the real fear, what is the thing that is driving your decision of why you want to vote for Donald Trump versus Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or any Senate race or governors, anything of that nature. There are reasons behind that, and it's about being curious, kind of like Ted Lasso talks about. It's about being curious and asking questions, not about talking to someone, but listening and conversing with someone. And so from that standpoint, I think that's something the Democrats have to get past, is always having to be right and always having to win on every issue. We don't have to win on every issue. The most important thing is, if we are not elected, then we are not at the table where the policy decisions are being made. When I was running for Congress in District 11, and I will just say, the abortion issue is a very difficult one for me. Growing up with a very conservative, very Baptist background, my dad was a Baptist missionary, is a very difficult issue for people like me. But the thing that I would talk to people on the trail about who disagree with me is, look, I understand that we may not agree at everything on this particular issue, but I can tell you, if I were to be elected, I'm going to be much more favorable toward your position than the other guy would be. And I think those are some of the compromises that we have to start to realize and to be able to make, rather than railing against the Democratic official who votes a way you don't think they should. And we have to be able to support that, and we have to get past that.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, compromise wasn't always a dirty word in politics, and I do believe in compromise. I think we have to be careful. I think that if we are going to compromise on certain issues to accomplish at least a certain percentage of what we want to accomplish legislatively, I think it's absolutely appropriate for us to hold the other side to that same accountability. In other words, we also sometimes make the mistake of being the only party willing to compromise. And in the end, it doesn't get us what we need. I go back and forth on this. I'm going to be brutally honest with you. I go back and forth on this, and I think where I've come down to on this issue is that on issues of policy like roads and bridges and defense and taxation and education and these types of things, I think I've drawn this line where I have a willingness inside myself to be willing to compromise, knowing that I can't get everything. Lord knows, when I was in my 20s, I used to get so frustrated that, George Mitchell would sit down with Bob Dole and compromise, and I would think in my younger days, well, he's just given up the whole farm. And now I think a lot of us that are older like me, we sit down and we think, my God, I'd give my right arm for the days when politicians were willing to sit down and compromise. But I also have a recognition, and I think this is just because of the way my grandmother raised me, is that I don't know that compromise always extends to social rights issues in terms of me being able to say I have a right to compromise and hold this line here for issues that affect our friends of color and our LGBTQ community friends. It's a tough issue. Billy, the person that does my media for me, has become a good friend of mine, and he will tell you he was part of the marriage equality push in this country. And my personal opinion is, while Billy and the LGBTQ community, they were willing to wait for America to come to them on the issue of marriage equality, I think maybe they were the only ones that had the right to say we're willing to compromise. I don't know that I had a right or a role in stepping in to say, you just wait to get married to the person you love and have all those benefits until we can convince all the other people that and I know that's not what you guys are saying. I'm speaking for myself personally. But I do think we need more compromise, absolutely. And I think a good place to start with that is what you both just talked about. Even on gun issues, I'm a gun owner, as most rural people are, but 80% of us don't believe in bump stocks. We don't believe in in magazines that carry, more than 30 clips. Most of us don't even believe that we need AR, 15s, et cetera. Those are issues of compromise that we can come together on gun issues, et cetera. So, yeah, I sleep, I sleep really well at night, but I probably draw that one line in the sand that I'm just not comfortable personally telling, our compromised populations in this country and our marginalized populations, you need to wait, until everybody else comes around. I'm kind of right there with them, scrapping it out, letting them lead, and I follow. So,
And I'm going to make sure that I delete this out of the recording here in just a minute for my boss at Progress, Texas. But I'm going to say something that might be controversial in this room, too, is I am not a lifelong Democrat. I was raised in an extremely conservative, almost Christian nationalist family at this point as well. Voted for Ron Paul in my first election.
Oh my God, I haven't done that.
You know, and
you're laying it all on the table today, brother.
And
We
at the
appreciate
same
it.
time, you know, I went to UT and I was corrupted by, you know, the Austin elite, and then voted for Obama twice, or at least I guess once after that. The point I'm trying to make is if I were you in San Angelo, I'd run as an independent. If I was along the border and we keep losing these communities, I'd run as something else. If there's a brand or a logo that don't look good or ain't working, it's like, hey, let's make sure that we like what you're trying to say here is that we're actually running to win. And then you get to a table and then you can show folks some wins and how their lives change. And so the thing that I don't want to say this because a lot of folks, they say, I'm a lifelong Democrat and that gives me credentials. And you know what? Good. I'm glad. Go for it. It doesn't immediately turn me off. But I think a lot of folks, it does turn them off. And so when people ask me like who you are or in government classes 15, 20 years ago or whatever, and I'd say I'm Reagan Stone, you know, like that's all I am. And it didn't matter if I had voted for Ron Paul or 4 years later I voted for Obama. I'm just me, and get to know me. And that goes back to the relationship.
Yeah, and I think there's a very generational, big generation gap, so to speak, with that, because with my kids and millennials and the generation coming up, it's just so much, they're not, what I've noticed is why do I have to choose between those two? Why can't I, you know, they've grown up in a world of choices, whereas I did not. You know, in my world it was you're Democrat and you're a Democrat.
Yeah.
You know, that was your choice, at least in the Texas that I grew up in. That's not the way it is anymore, and that's not the way people see it. And I just wanted to add one other thing to that is when I talk about compromise, though, and I think it's the same thing that Will was hitting on, is that when you talk about compromise, I'm not talking about compromising on fundamental, constitutional, democratic values of, you know, one person, one vote. You know, we don't have any, you know, today's a good day to say it, no kings. We believe in a democratic Republican form of government, those sorts of things. And so there are issues at which, you know, and what those are, and in what context you say this is the line, we go no further. Those are very difficult things.
I promise I'll stop, but I just want to say we ought to add one more to that value list. I think everyone in this room should be against Citizens United as well.
Amen. Yeah.
Well, that's money, yeah.
Can I say one thing too? I do think sometimes we overcomplicate what it means to talk to. You know, I laugh sometimes because we all live in rural America or we've come from it. It's not like we're talking about, come on, honey, pack the kids up. We're going to go look at the rural people in the zoo. You know, we're going to, don't feed the rural person. You know, I mean, really in the end, you know, I think if we take that approach, like, I don't know if it's true or not, but if it is, next time I see Ken Martin, I'm just going to really rib him about this. I read that we may or may not have just spent $20 million to figure out how to speak to young men. And if that's true, I am just the cheese is going to slide off my cracker the next time I go to a DNC meeting, because there are a lot of us out here in rural America that were raised by really good, fair dads and moms and great and grandpas, and we're already talking to young men. We know how to talk to young men. We know how to teach them that life is not always about conquest, but it's about standing up for the underdog and being on the right side of history and believing that all people are created equal, etc. So I do think sometimes we overcomplicate it a little bit. And like I said earlier today when I was speaking, you know, when I talk to rural people, and I go out and talk to a lot of Republicans, that's my favorite place to be. I'm Daniel, baby, throw me right into that lion's den. And when I talk to them, I really do ask those questions. Who's against quality education for kids in rural America? Who's against, you know, good hospitals in rural America? Because we get caught up in these little narrow issues that impact so few of us. The other thing I think we don't do a great job of is positioning what we really believe in as Democrats. I've never met a single Democrat that went to somebody and said, I want you to believe that abortion is moral. I've never heard a Democrat do that. What I hear Democrats argue is that that choice ought to be left up to a woman in the autonomy of her own body. That's the argument that's been made. And as a lot of conservatives out there believe in the individual autonomy over their own body, their own mind, et cetera. That's a very conservative argument. We sometimes forget that 8 of the justices on the Supreme Court that ratified Roe v. Wade were appointed by Republican presidents. I mean, for Pete's sake. Many of them were conservative justices. On human rights issues, all we're arguing as Democrats, I've never had a gay friend, a lesbian friend, a trans friend. I've never once heard them make the argument agree with my lifestyle. I've just heard them say, when I go to apply for a job, when I go to apply for a bank loan, if I pass away and my partner is left here on this earth, I want the same rights and freedoms as everybody else in this country has. And to me, those are just not radical ideas. And I think what happens is the other side takes these things and they turn them into, you know, personal litmus tests for, well, if you believe somebody has a right to be who they are, then, you know, you're asking me to advocate that I agree with that lifestyle. And I've never seen a Democrat do that, you know. So anyway, I don't think it's as hard to talk to rural people as we think. And I think if we position it from our values perspective versus what you said, the lead to talking to a rural person can't be, come here, dummy, who always votes against your best interest. I'd like to have a conversation with you.
Yeah,
you know,
and stop saying that rural people are voting against their interests.
Yeah.
Rural people are smart. They're very intelligent, and they have their own way of knowing what they think is in their best interest. You may disagree with what they decided to do, but and as you said, we've gotten this question a lot at the 134 PAC, because you'll always get the urban people urban candidates calling us, how do I talk to rural people? And I was like, well, you go up and you say, hi, my name is Jon Mark Hogg.
There's got to be a good meme in there somewhere,
you know,
right?
It's not difficult. What it takes is effort. It just takes you being there. And that's really what rural people want to see more than anything else.
Progress Texas podcasting director Chris Mosier here. Independent, public, fact-based media is under direct attack by the Trump administration and congressional Republicans. Why? Because we dare to speak truth to power. We don't fire our staff members for expressing their own views. We don't shy away from what's really happening out of fear. As we all know, information is power, and once the truth is silenced, we're all powerless. Progress Texas relies on funding from our listeners and viewers to keep shining a light on the truth in Texas. If you've come to rely on Progress Texas, please support us. We don't do subscriptions or paywalls because the media we produce is important for everyone to be able to see and hear, but it can't continue without you. Please become a regular, sustaining monthly supporter of Progress Texas right now at progresstexas.org/donate.
You've all touched on this, but I just want to follow up on this point in particular. The Democratic Party brand in rural America. And when people hear Democrat, what they think. And it was mentioned kind of in the other panel too about there's this national sense of Democrats. And then there's the rural Democrats. And part of the disconnect, I think, is there are some who don't want there to be a difference. There are some local Democrats who want to do everything the national apparatus is doing and transplant Marin County to Victoria County. And one of my big things as chair was like, we are never gonna be Marin County. They have some lovely people and that's wonderful, but this is Victoria. It is what it is. And we gotta play with the cards we're dealt. That doesn't mean we don't like them, or we disavow them, or we're selling out, or we're traitors, but we have to run things differently. The brand needs to run differently. One of my frustrations of the party nationally and statewide was there was this push, it seemed to be by some, not everyone, of every county, every Democratic chair needs to do this. And regardless of what your dynamics are. Again, born and raised in a place like Victoria, I remember when there were conservative Democratic lawmakers. Okay, the man I worked for was he was the last U.S. Congressman, Greg Laughlin, before Ron Paul beat him, right? He was the last Democrat, he was a conservative Democrat. Our county commissioner's court was dominated by conservative Democrats. Our mayor, all these, and now there's none. So when I took over as chair, I was like, hey guys, why can't we go back to that formula? Why can't I say, as a Democrat, and I hope I don't lose people in the room, I think abortion is wrong and a moral sin. But I also think that the government shouldn't legislate, right? Why can't I say that? No, you can't say that, right? So we've got to, why can't we get back to conservative Democrat? So I'm just wondering from y'all's perspective, is Democrat an identity or is it an affiliation? I felt that it's an affiliation. You think you're saying controversial things, not lifelong Democrat. I consider myself a member of neither party now. Oh no, don't throw, right? People say, what are you? I'm Woodrow, hi. I'm named after a president, God bless, right? That's who I am. I vote different ways for different candidates, but this idea that my identity is Democrat. My name's Woodrow, I'm a Democrat. My name's Woodrow, I'm a Republican. I just think it's killing us. And I'm just wondering where y'all are in this identity versus affiliation, because it seems to me my success in talking to rural America and rural policymakers is a lot more successful when I don't have the label. Now, I'm not saying abandon the label and don't be whatever you want, but if we keep leading with the Democratic Party this, the Democratic Party that, rather than this helps kids in this, and this helps old people in this, the issue rather than the party platform. Yes, there's a Venn diagram, but all those issues in the Democratic Party, we all get that. But if we approach it differently from our communication, does that make the difference? Affiliation versus identity.
My name's Reagan. I was named after the president, and we both get mixed reviews. So, you know.
Therapy group.
Yeah. But it's a really good question. It's difficult. You know, I tend to connect a lot of the social issues to basic fundamental rights. So whether you're talking about abortion or you're talking about environmental justice, put in the power plants in the poorest and the most black and brown communities, or if you're talking about voting rights and systematically trying to keep poor people and black and brown communities away from the polls, all of those are in the same bucket for me. And I guess the best way to say that is right now, the Democratic Party is fighting for things that I believe in. With that, I have been having a lot of conversations around what's going on with David Hogg. And I'm sure we have different views in this room. But the newest thing, and the thing that I think goes back even to the first question of meeting neighbors where they are, is the fact that I feel like a lot of us have been forgotten. That could be you in urban or rural or wherever the heck you are. That's the fact of the matter that I think is missed here, is that we all in an identity, we're forgotten. By who, about what? Those are questions that need to be done over a beer or a coffee, depending on the time of the day. But, that's the fact of the matter, is I gotta say, Democrats have a pretty bad name, I think we're forgotten right now. And I see some Democrats, some really good people with big hearts that are fighting for me.
Forgotten, ignored, cast to the side, not elevated, even though they should be. So well said.
The only thing I could think of when you were talking and asking that question was the old I'm Will Rogers. I'm not a member of an organized political party. I'm a Democrat. And I don't know that I agree with that assessment of things, with Mr. Rogers' assessment of things, but there's, identity seems to me to be, and what I've learned is, and as I was talking earlier about what my Republican judge friend thought, is identity to a certain extent is what I impose upon myself. Affiliation can be, I'm affiliating with this group now for this temporary reason because, and we just passed a big school bond. We were in San Angelo, and we hadn't passed one in over 20 years, and it was Republican voters who we worked with and who the Democrats and other local organizations worked with that got that bond passed. And so, we affiliate together for a specific purpose, but our identity is something that we're imposing upon ourselves. And I guess it's kind of a question. The Democratic brand is toxic. The biggest part of running for office in rural Texas, I've found, is getting people over the idea that you're a Democrat and that you don't have horns growing out of your head and that you're not here to destroy America. That's the biggest part of the problem, and you have to try to get over that before the people will even open up to even listen to you. That's something that has to change. I think the issue is, my identity as a Democrat. That's just how I've seen myself for my life, because my political beliefs align, I believe, more closely with what Democrats have stood for historically than Republicans. But that's also born in an era in which Republicans, it was the country club Republicans, it was the Eisenhower Republicans, the Richard Nixon Republicans, that sort of mindset. And I think I knew where I was going with this, but I'm just going to try to find a trail back, which is that I think identity is important in politics. If you're not concerned about being in politics, quote unquote, it's easy to have no identity or to have no affiliation politically. If you want to be involved, if you want to be in politics, you're talking about, running as an independent in San Angelo. I always say running as an independent is foolish, because you're already not identified with the Republicans, and what support you might have had from the Democrats is gone because you didn't run as a Democrat. So it's just a very difficult position to be in. I think what we have to focus on, not necessarily is running away from that identity, but changing the way people see it. And that's all I can comment about that.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I would just say really quickly, so I literally one time sat in a room and I listened to Democrats argue for 4.5 hours about whether $17.50 or $20 an hour was the right livable wage. For 4.5 hours. And they walked out of that room not speaking to each other. People were angry. They went home and sent all kinds of awful emails about one another. You don't support workers. You do support workers. Why are you in the party? Why are you not? And I think we do an awful lot of that sometimes, where we're all pro-worker, we're pro-individual rights, et cetera, but we get caught up on this scale of, what does it mean to be that? What is the litmus test for that? I think what we need to do, and what I've tried to do with the Back 40, is I just talk about the issues that I believe in. I've never once maybe to my detriment, gotten caught up in the Hillary versus Bernie arguments, the David Hogg versus Ken Martin arguments. My feeling is if anybody wants to run in the Democratic Party primary to become a Democrat for office, they ought to have the right to do that, whether they're in office or not. My feeling is that you as a candidate have to decide how far you want to go to meet people. You may be willing to go part of the way and, say that, hey, I disagree with abortion or I disagree with these, life choice issues, but I still believe you have a right to be who you are, or you may want to go all the way and advocate for those things. And I think sometimes we get too caught up in, what is the litmus test for being a Democrat? What I do think is if we talk about the things that are important to us, if we talk about saving schools, saving hospitals, a good economy, a good ag economy, what it means to have a vibrant, live rural area that young people can stay and remain a part of and raise their children there. And in the process, we identify ourselves as Democrats. I think it's going to be those issues and those beliefs that bring people back to the Democratic Party. Because here's how I feel about the Republicans, and I'll just close with this. Even though I'm an Episcopalian, I have a dirty little secret. And that dirty little secret is that I love Richard Pryor and Eddie Murphy comedy specials. And when nobody's around so that they can't hear the language, I love to pop those things on a Friday night and get out the popcorn and listen. And Eddie Murphy's got this great joke where he's talking about this man gets caught being unfaithful to his wife. And I mean, she reads him the riot act. And the husband says, you know what, baby? It was wrong. I did the wrong thing. I did all these things that I accuse you of. But honey, I love you. And you ladies know what I'm talking about because I had a dad who was a flight risk, okay? And I listened to these arguments all the time growing up until the day he passed away. But my point with that is Republicans, they always say the right thing to their constituency. They go out and they say the right thing to rural America. But then once they get in office, they don't ever do it. They don't ever do it. I have yet to see a rural hospital saved in my home state of Missouri. I have yet to see a rural school not consolidate because of a great new policy that the Republican Party brought up. I have yet to see internet and Wi-Fi come to my rural communities in Missouri because the Republicans lived up to their promise. So on that great stage of which would I rather be, I'll always say Democrat. And I just say if we stand up and talk about and espouse the things we believe in and let people know that we're a Democrat in the process, we can change all of these issues with labeling, tagging, and everything else that we have.
And I want to say one thing. I know we got to.
And sorry for the language there.
Oh, you're good with me. We love cussing on the Progress
Yeah,
Texas podcast, by the way. So if you like that, please listen. But I'm known for the person that's like, who's in the room? And this one more is like, what haven't we talked about? And this is by no means nobody's fault here. It's just I love bringing up stuff like this. Is what does Texas have that only 4 states in the union have? Only other 4 out of 50. We have a border with Mexico. What was the biggest issue in the past election? It was border security or immigration, migration, however you want to message that. The Democrats still have not come up with a plank or a policy platform. And this isn't the only issue. I mean, of the 3 main big issues, maybe it's border security, migration, whatever you want to call it, the economy. I don't know if we know what we're talking about there, and so forth. That's the fact of the matter is that somebody's got to say what they believe in. And that's really, I think, where the identity comes down to as well. Put a sign over your head that says Democrat, but say what the heck you believe in.
Well said. We're now going to go to questions. Looks like we have some questions. Carla's going to float around.
Yeah, I know that we're short on time, and so thank you all for sticking around, and we're going to take some questions. Do you have a question?
I just want to clarify something. Mothers Against Greg Abbott put out messaging on the border. We put out messaging on the Biden economy, on the economy, on vouchers. And you know what? I mean, I did my best. You can only do so much and bring people to just have a little bit of water at the watering hole, but there's only so much we can do. Thing is that this Democratic Party sometimes doesn't like to listen. So there's.
Say that one more time.
Exactly, exactly. That is exactly it. But this time we don't have a choice. And so I do want to say that no matter how we feel about being Democrat, I am a strong Democrat. I do feel like we need to show up in democratic ways, because when there is something good going on in our communities, the people that work at the food bank, the people that work at the soup kitchens, the people that help out other neighbors, there's always a Democrat behind it. And we should be proud of being a Democrat because of that. So I just kind of want to clarify that, because I just think it's really important. And the other thing is too, that I want to clarify with something else that you all said. We forget that when we elect people into office in Austin or in DC, they're there to represent a community. They're not there because they're Catholic and they have their own beliefs. They're there because they have to represent the community. There is a separation of church and state. So even though like somebody may have a certain belief on abortion, they should really survey their community to find out how they should vote on an issue, and they should survey their community before they survey their particular church. So that is just my personal belief, but I just wanted to share that.
Nancy, I agree with you 100%, and I know you do the hard work. And I think there's also things that 99% of us would agree that detaining children is not okay, that a for-profit detention center, private companies making money off of this, is not okay. And that'd be two great places to start with putting it in our plank. But I agree with what you're saying.
You guys are tired of listening to me. I've been talking all day. And thank you for giving me the microphone once again. You know, I think the Republicans have done a really good job of blurring the line between churches and state, and have used our churches to demonize Democrats. But I also think that our party has not done a job at all at messaging, and they will own that. I mean, our new chairman is owning that right now. He's been on TV more than our former chairman was in his first 2 weeks in office, than he was the whole 12 years that he was in office. I'm not kidding. And, you know, one of the things that I admire about our new chairman, Kendall Scudder, is he knows how to pivot really well. When somebody asks him a question that he doesn't want to be the focus, he's focused on the 4 points that he wants to talk about, and that's that we all have to sit down and eat dinner somewhere every night. And that's what we have in common. So the economy, and you know, he's got 3 or 4 things that he wants to talk about. And you know, I think the important thing for us to know, we all respect the marginalized people in our society. You know, it's our belief as Democrats that we need to do that. The Republican Party, though, is extremely talented at baiting us with an issue like transgender or you know, LGBTQ issues or the abortion issue and things like that, and not ever allowing us the privilege. You know, we have to be really talented, I think, with that pivot to actually talk about the things that matter to all of us. And they've been so good at that, and we need to shut that down. And we need to think about how we can pivot from those things that we don't want to focus on, and learn how to redirect the conversation to the items that we can connect on. My thoughts.
Well, let me say this. I think the way I'd probably put that is the economy was absolutely the most important issue in the last election. We've had, I'm going to put my political consultant hat on now. We've had 3 major polls that have come out since the last election, and I went through one the other day on the Back 40 podcast where we talked about this big poll that was just done in Colorado that only looked at why did so many Democrats stay home and why did so many Democrats vote for Donald Trump. Because the truth of the matter is we had the same pattern that we saw when people went from Obama to Trump to Biden to Trump. We had a lot of Democrats that voted for Trump. And it was not 100%, but about 87%, you know, driven by the economy. And so to your point, Yes, I think it's important that we talk about social justice issues, absolutely. I think it should be in the conversation every time we talk about who we are as Democrats, but I also think it's important to understand that it wasn't those social justice issues, as much as we would like to say otherwise, that drove the majority of Democrats who voted for Trump or didn't vote not to get up and go out into the last election. It was the economy. And a lot of Democrats that stayed home, whether we think it's right or not, didn't feel like the Democratic Party was advocating for fixing the economic issues that are out there that are causing millennials not to be able to buy homes, not to have a life-sustaining wage. When you have two people in a partnership working full-time and you still have to struggle just to even pay rent, that's not the America I think that we all believe in and agree with. And I agree 100% with what you said about trying to get the issues out there. I did something really interesting in a poll once, though, and this was just based on a personal discussion that I have with a friend of mine in the Democratic Party. We do a really good job of putting issues out there, like our platform, in the Democratic Party, and what we put out on the Harris Walls website was really good. But I did a poll right before the election, and I thought, just for kicks and grins, I'm going to ask the question. This was of Democrats. How many times in the last 12 months have you looked at the Democratic platform on the Democratic Party website or any other website? I asked that question. 8% of Democrats had looked at the platform. So I make the mistake sometimes at the back 40 of thinking, if I put this information out there, everybody's going to read it, they're going to look at it, they're going to understand it. When in reality, if only 8% of Democrats are looking at our platform and reading it and try to understand it, it's probably less than 1% of Republicans or, independents that are doing that. So I think, to the bigger point that was made, we just have to talk about these things. If we talk about the right things, and what I mean by right are the things we believe in as Democrats, and then we let people know we are Democrats, it's going to be the issues that lead them to our party, and not the label on the party that brings them to us. Because right now, whether we love it or not, our party brand is not great. I hope that makes sense anyway. So.
Well, and I would say the platform, though, is a document that's created by a very specific group of people in a very specific place, and it does not necessarily address the issues that are going to fit with where you are or where you're running or where you're trying to work. I got asked by, somebody said the word Farm Bureau earlier and spit at the same time, I think. But I was presenting before a Farm Bureau, and that's one of the questions I got from that highly Republican group out there in Miles, Texas, was, well, what about the Democratic Party platform? And it got it in oil country too. What about the Democratic Party platform? And the only thing I can say to that is, the Democratic Party has its platform. I've got my own platform. And sometimes they go together and sometimes they don't. I mean, I think we have to differentiate between, when we talk about democratic values and democratic issues, those mean different things to different Democrats. And so the platform does not necessarily reflect the views of everybody. So I don't think we can make the mistake of saying that's the thing that we ought to be getting everybody on board with, though.
Thank you. First of all, thanks for all the different panels and things that have come up the last 2 days. I've been particularly waiting for this one because I think asking a question or talking to rural neighbors is so important and so difficult. So I've heard we want to meet the neighbors where they are. And I'm willing to do that, but the factor that's difficult for me, and I want to know how you guys think you overcome that, is the digital platforms. And that we all seem to have really big scrotums when we're on the digital platforms. And so I'll be one of my Facebook friends, who I also have a business relationship with, will post that all Democrats are communist, fascist, Nazis, which is quite a trifecta, by the way. And then that we're also evil and don't believe in anything positive. Then I have to go see that person the next day in my business relationship. And I want to visit with them and learn how they think. And I have a real hard time getting past being the communist Nazi fascist person in the first place. Do you have strategies to overcome that digital platform that puts a roadblock into actually conversing with rural people?
My thought on this, and we'll hear from the panelists, a lot of that is so performative. And it is, it's offensive, it's terrible, it's often, but it's performative. Michael Cloud puts lots of things out into the world. If I judged him based on that and didn't have the one-on-one conversations when the cameras are not rolling, when not even the chief of staff is in the room, then it's a different thing. So our current Victoria County Democratic Party, one of my frustrations with it is they spend a lot of time on social media. They spend little time actually talking to folks that they disagree with. They say lots of things about them and their record and how horrible they are, but they're not willing to have that. So unless you're able to take a moment and say, this is performative, this is a manufactured reality that is not consistent with the real world. This doesn't speak to the core values of who this person is. Unless your brain can do that, then you can't. You'll let the performative social media manufactured reality rule politics. But that is not where public policy is made on Facebook. Public policy is made having these conversations, these difficult conversations, with people that disagree with us. But panelists.
So I'm going to say this again. Progress Texas is a big digital platform. My job there is not social media. I know a lot of y'all in the room, and if you don't know me yet, you can come up and talk to me after. We can exchange info. I hope we chat. Sometimes I'm a little cranky. I'm not always the young brat that you're seeing up here right now. But generally, I think folks think I'm all right. But point to that is what I'm trying to say is get off social media. That's really where it is. And then the intro question, because I have the same thing. I go to the local watering hole and I meet with folks that are posting, the same thing, communist, Nazi, whatever else you want to put in there. And
A communist Nazi.
yeah, back-to-back World War champions, I guess. I don't know. Must have been part of the Allies. Goodness. The whole thing, I think it goes back to what Will said this morning is like, can you even have a conversation with this person? That's like, the Stoic philosopher is like, don't waste your time with something that you can't change or have an outcome on. That's a good point to start there. I think number 2 is a good question if you figure you even want to put in 10 or 15 minutes into a conversation with someone, is that, what do you think that I think? That's an easy place. Well, you think this, this, and this. It's like, my goodness, where did you hear that? Because this is actually what I think. And I'm sorry I'm not getting into a specific example, but I think that's how you start a conversation, is you say, where's your line? And I'm like, well, heck, I've never even stood in that area. Goodness. And I don't know if AOC is there either, But, we could talk about that for hours, I guess.
Well, I think the way I approach that issue is, one, humor. And I don't mean humor in responding or replying to the message as saying something counter to that or making a joke of it. I tend to just ignore all those sort of posts and also realize that it's nothing personal to you. It's nothing personal to any Democrats that person knows. It's not about you at all. When the person posted that, he was posting that for some other reason that has nothing to do with you. And in fact, who was it? Somebody said, if you realized how little people were thinking about you, you probably wouldn't worry about what they think about you all the time. How little they think about you, which is never. But how I deal with that is in a more personal response, particularly if you're talking to someone that you work with, that you deal with, is when the opportunity comes to be able to make a little joke about, my being a communist. It's self-deprecating humor in that way. And trying to approach it from that standpoint, I know it irritates you, but I think the best advice as far as that is just to not engage with it, on social media. I'm not a political consultant, but personally, anecdotally, I can't think of a single person that got elected because of their social media campaign. How you get elected is through other means. It's just one thing to do, and it's not really even a very serious one, and it's not real. And I think if we have that approach to it, or that attitude towards it, my kids, they're in their late 20s to early 30s, and so they've grown up with the entire technology world. And my daughter's on every social media thing you can see, but she never posts. Or she only posts on certain things with very tight privacy settings and about certain topics. And that's the approach that I need to have. And let me tell you, that unfollow button is the best feature you can find on those sort of things, and start curating your feed so that those sort of things aren't triggering you.
Will, I gotta say something here, being Texan in this way, is that I did a calculation a few days ago. 250 counties, I know there's 254, but 250 counties, $50,000 a year to hire an organizer in each one of those is $10 million a year. $10 million bucks a year. And I think the only way we can win elections is knocking on doors, and that means in rural Texas too, because in Brewster County there's 9,800 people, but 6,800 of them live in Alpine. So you can knock on 3/4 of the town easily. You don't have to have social media or mailers or all these other things. There's population centers in rural towns. And I would say comparison to that, and $80 million spent on social media on the Colin Allred campaign. $80 million. So 8 years of hiring 250 organizers in Texas could have been spent differently.
Yeah, I love social media in the sense that it's a great way to communicate a message, and it's a great way to get feedback for a broad scale for an organization. So where I would recommend it is if you've got a group like, this group, or if you've got like the Back 40, it's a great way to communicate on a broad scale, especially individual stories. So the way I like to use it, and the way I would encourage local Democratic Party, organizations to use it, would be like right now, I would be finding people in your community that are Democrats, or anyone else that would be willing to speak up, that would be willing to do a short 3-minute video on here's what's going to happen to my mom, my child, or me if Medicaid gets cut, and then use your social media to get that story out there. On the personal issues like we're talking about, I love the idea of humor. I've gone into work the next day, or gone to a meeting the next day of the local Chamber of Commerce, or gone into church, and I'd be like, Mike, did you type up that message with the same fingers you used to put your tithing in the offering plate?
That's exactly right.
And, they'll laugh, and, you can get, because listen, you can tell the difference within 3 minutes between somebody that, was having a bad day, or they're reading crazy stuff out there, watching Fox News, and the guy that's going to talk to you for 45 minutes outside of the grocery store about how the UN is coming in next week to take over, the country, that kind of thing. And are you going to change the mind of that second person? No. But you can have a conversation, with that first person. Because listen, we do our own share of that, right? I used to be an assassin on social media. And then about 9 years ago, my family had an intervention, and whatever the opposite of the Fox News syndrome is, I had that. And my family did an intervention and said, Dad, you raised us our entire lives to learn how to talk to people about convincing them to do the right thing. And here you're out here calling everybody flim, flam, flarf, and flim, and all the other things that go along with it. And I just stopped, because nothing impresses me more than when my kids hold me accountable to what I raise them to do, when I'm not doing it myself. So that would be how I would approach it, is just with humor. And if they don't have a sense of humor, well, let them go pound sand,
Okay, I think, do you have one question? Okay, one last question.
One brief. I'd like to encourage, I just want to encourage you guys, you know who you are, based on comments, to reframe your idea that younger people are willing to switch parties and don't necessarily think they're Democrats or Republicans. No, I'm older than you are, Mr. Hogg, and I never have thought I'm only a Democrat, and I've never voted just Democrat. I have a degree in political science. My dad was a Dixiecrat, and I respected that. And I do think of myself as being a Democrat, but a progressive one. But I have voted for many Republican candidates who were excellent candidates. I researched their stance on the things that I cared about, the issues that I cared about that applied to me personally. And I made my decision based on that. And I was astounded when my son, my adult son, said to me a couple of weeks ago, well, I really didn't want to vote for Trump, but I couldn't see myself ever voting for a Democrat. So it's not just generational. Some of that is, I don't know where that kind of thinking comes from, but I do know that a lot of people only identify their whole life as Democrat or Republican. But there's a lot of us out there that don't fit that stereotype either.
Well, there are, and I would say the majority of people, and that's the one thing that I've learned through my time in politics is almost nobody that I know who's normal thinks about politics. They don't think about being Democrat or Republican. They may sit there and think about who should I vote for president or Senate, but 9 times out of 10, they're not necessarily going, identifying it from a partisan standpoint. But I think ultimately what we have in our county is they all vote Republican anyway. And a lot of that is just, that's how it's been for so long there now that we can't even really identify who all the Democrats are. As a county chair, I can't tell you who all the Democrats are. And even if I get a list of primary voters, I can't tell you how many Democrats are because they're all voting in the Republican primary because that's where the race for sheriff is taking place or the race for county commissioner is taking place. And so they may vote Democrat come the fall, come election time, but they're not voting that way, so we can't identify that.
I think we actually agreed with you, we just didn't say it well enough.
That's true.
I think so. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up, and I want to thank you all very much. And just like all these other panels, we could talk another 2 or 3 hours. These are some awesome conversations, and I know that I can listen to your conversation and your advice for a long time. So thank you again. Thank you to all the audience, and I guess that's a wrap.
All right.
Unless you have any other comments?